All right, here we are. Adam, thank you for joining me from the beautiful Montana, not
Thank you.
your
I'm
home. We'll get
actually in
into that.
Wyoming. Yeah. Actually, Wyoming. I'm in Wyoming right
Oh,
now.
sorry,
Yeah.
Wyoming. I meant
Yeah.
I meant Wyoming. Yes. Well, as I was telling you, I also am whole food plant based, and so I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts because of my rule that I have to listen to stuff that doesn't have to do with addiction. And all of a sudden, here I am hearing my two favorite things combined, addiction, substance use, mental health, and a plant-based diet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with you.
Yeah,
And those are my
it's
two favorite subjects. So this is going to be
Or I know it's kind of a weird combo. People are like, "What?"
Yeah.
It's interesting because I did not come into a whole food plant-based diet until after my son's experience, and I was
Mhm.
trying to rebuild my health. Because a lot of parents, when our kids struggle, we just forget about ourselves completely. It's like, oh, I'll take care of her whenever this crisis ends. So that's when I found, plant-based diet and started really diving into, I heard you on Simon Hill's podcast. And so, yeah, there's a million things that we're going to get into. But I would just love to ask you, like, how are you right now in this moment today?
How am I today?
Just today.
Yeah. Well, today I'm doing really well. Um, as I mentioned, I'm in Wyoming, which is not where I live. I live in Austin, Texas. And Austin is has been consistently increasing in temperature in the summer, not necessarily in like how hot it gets, but how quickly it gets to be its hottest and how long it sustains that heat. And my wife and I decided we wanted to get out of the heat. We My father-in-law has a place in Wyoming, and we said let's just go. We'll stay there. We're going to stay here through most of August. So we're sleeping with the window open, 55-degree evenings. We wake up 60-degree mornings. We go hiking the canyon. And believe it or not, we're in a town of about 750 people. And there is the most um, enthusiastic pickleball crew here in this town. And so I am a pickleball fanatic. When I'm home in Austin, I play about 4 days a week minimum.
Wow.
And I'm able to get Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 a.m., 2 hours of pickleball a day on those days. And so I'm feeling fantastic. You look at the beautiful landscape of Wyoming, play pickleball in the morning, sleep with the windows open. So I'm doing fantastic right now.
That sounds pretty magical.
Yeah.
I think I could go down a big pickleball rabbit hole, but I will not because I really want to get into some other stuff with
Yeah.
you.
We can do a second episode about pickleball.
About pickleball.
Right.
Yes. So, could you ever imagine, you know, if you flashed back a ways in your life that you would be sitting here talking about playing pickleball for a couple of hours a
Yeah.
day, doing what you're doing?
You know, it's really it's such an interesting question. Um, and the answer is no. The answer is certainly no. Um, over almost a little over 11 years ago, at this point, I was approaching a suicide attempt. I was going to attempt to end my life, and my I had spent the better part of 10 plus years dealing with substance use disorder at a very end stage level. I was dealing with extreme depression, anxiety. Uh, I was experiencing loneliness to a degree that was crippling. And I always like to preface that with it wasn't the physical absence of people. That's not what I believe. There's a British journalist named Johan Hari. He wrote a phenomenal book called Lost Connections. He's given phenomenal TED Talks. He has a quote about loneliness. It is probably the best I've ever heard. And he says that loneliness isn't the physical absence of people, it is the sense that you have nothing of value to share with anyone. And that's truly how I was feeling. I had spent my early high school life, by the time I was 15, 16 years old, spent the better part of a year being extremely bullied, both physically, verbally, emotionally. I felt very disconnected from a life that felt like a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be, both physically and emotionally. It wasn't always a safe place to be emotionally in front of my parents. There's just no like anything intentionally that they were doing. There's just a lot of criticism about how I looked, my weight. Was I'm starting to gain weight. Um, and then I would go to school and I would experience intense bullying. Um, so I would wake up into a life that I didn't feel like there was anything meaningful to be present for. In fact, the experience of being present in my life was a very painful place, very painful experience. It was a very, very painful thing to do. And so when I discovered substance use, it wasn't as if I was like, hey, listen, if I really start to abuse stimulants, this is going to be a good thing in 10 years. It's not like that's not the process that was happening. It was truly like an explorative, convivial thing that I was kind of reaching into in an attempt to kind of create a sense of safety from these bullies. If I was, hey, look, guys, I have Adderall. Because really the situation was one of the kids who bullied me witnessed me take one of my doses of Adderall in the middle of class my freshman year, and after class, it came up to me and said, "Hey, with this kind of story, listen, I'm so sorry we've been bullying you. You're new to town and you're freshman. You know how it is. Um, listen, I've told the guys, no more with that. All right, they're done. So we have a party this weekend. Why don't you come? And why don't I just saw you take some Adderall, right? So why don't you bring that? If you could give us some of that at the party, that'd be fantastic." And what was amazing was I felt so much relief hearing that because, and I've said this before, I was awkward. I was slightly overweight. But I wasn't stupid by any stretch of imagination. So I knew exactly what was happening. I knew that there was no promise to stop bullying me, that there was no that they didn't, it wasn't like this thing that they were gonna stop doing. But I had a sense that if I could create a reality where if I was not harmed, I would provide Adderall for them, what a fantastic solution, what an attractive solution that might be to one aspect of my life that felt like a very, very difficult thing to experience regularly, which was physical and emotional harm. And so it felt and looked exactly like self care. And then when I went to this party and I used Adderall as a recreational drug for the first time, I noticed that there was an additional layer of attraction to it. And I use that term attraction because I think it's an accurate description. People like to talk about chemical hooks and substances as being the thing that will compel an individual to continue to use. What's so important is up until that point, a lot of my daily life was spent in an experience of discomfort, confusion, pain, anxiety, anger, fear. There was very little, if any, aspect of my day to day life that felt like a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be. And it didn't seem like that was going to end anytime soon. So my future was an equally unsafe, unsecure, and hopeless place to be. And I'd been able to solve one aspect of it, which was the physical and emotional harm at school by delivering Adderall. Now it seemed like I might have been able to figure out how to solve the others. So Adderall isn't a stimulant; it's an amphetamine. It's what the stuff is. I'm not saying that because I'm anti Adderall or anti medicine. I just say it to be accurate. And so what that means is if I can take enough of it, I will ramp up my metabolism. I will also create an incredible sense of confidence. I'll have unbelievable amounts of energy. I will increase the excitatory response of social activity. These were all things that I was missing and wasn't able to figure out. I was slightly overweight. Adderall is an amphetamine, so if I take enough and I take that amount long enough, I can successfully restrict caloric intake. I also noticed that people like me when I'm on Adderall. People like that I'm around when I'm on Adderall. I'm fun at the parties because I have boundless energy. I can party all night long. I also allow them to have a better experience because I can provide them with the same stimulus. Um,
Like,
I
what's
can also
wrong about this,
well,
right?
so no, exactly,
Like, what
and my behaviors outside of the party experience, like in schoolwork and everything, seem to be very different. I seem to be able to focus and hyper focus on a single point of attention in a way that I'd never done so before, and that allowed me to behave in a way that seemed to impress my father. My dad was starting to become impressed. Adam, great job. You're losing weight. That's fantastic. Oh my God, Adam, look at your schoolwork getting done. That's fantastic. Way to go. That to solve those unsolvable problems with ease and repeatability, that's important, is a very attractive thing to discover in your life as long as that thing solves problems for you that could not have been solved with as much ease and repeatability any other way. So that attraction, that connection to that bonding that occurs to the substance use, it's appropriate. This isn't biology gone wrong. This isn't neurochemistry gone wrong. This isn't willpower gone wrong. This isn't discipline gone wrong. This is the exact right, appropriate psychological and biological response to a stimulus that is that powerful and is that attractive to an individual in that situation. And so, I spent the better part of 10 years going down the typical trajectory of a substance use disorder, which is at a certain point it becomes too much, and the solution becomes an overwhelming problem, and it starts to cost you things. It starts to become a disorder. This is where I always like to tell people: substance use is not always abusive. Some people are just substance users. They do it convivially. They go out on a Friday night. They have a couple drinks of wine. They enjoy themselves. They don't need the wine to have a good time. They're having a good time and they have wine. It's a very different thing.
very different
Some people are
combination.
substance users. Some people end up in a state where that substance use becomes disordered. And that's what happened to me over time. What happened is the need, the connection, the profound importance that it had become for me had become so ever present that it had disordered my ability to be present for things that were very, very valuable in allowing me to live a healthy, meaningful life.
Mm.
What, when, how, I eat. What, who, where was I being social? My connection to purpose, my connection to, the goings on of the world around me, my ability to maintain hygiene, finances, all these really meaningful, important aspects of a balanced life got pushed aside in order to make more room for substance use, and that's really where it kind of went downhill to where by the time I was 30, I was a little about 350 pounds. I had, advanced diabetes and heart disease, which I didn't know about. I had erectile dysfunction, which I did know about. I was about 2 weeks away from being kicked out of my apartment. I didn't have any money. And I had severed meaningful relationships, not because they hadn't consistently tried to be there, but because, and I talked about this on the podcast with Simon. They said, why do you think it is? He asked me, why do you think it is that people in that situation, when it's starting to really get bad, why is it so difficult to ask for help? And why is it also so difficult for the loved ones who are witness to that individual? Why is it so hard for them to, come out and say, hey, I know what's going on. It's not hot, it's not hidden. We see it. What can we do? And I think that what's happening is when someone is struggling with substance use disorder, the most important thing, the most valuable thing left to us is a sense that we have people that matter to us and that they see us as someone who matters to them, that we are a valuable part of their goings on, of their world. And there's a fear that if I were to let you know everything about what's going on, if you were to truly see, you might not want me anymore.
Yeah.
The threat of that is so profound then that is usually what prevents someone from taking that step, whether it's the person who's abusing substances or it's the person of witness to it. And so that was my situation until August 21st of 2012 when I tried to end my life by suicide. Um, and so the idea that I would ever, let alone find recovery, uh, and then on top of that, restore my health, and then on top of that, build a life that felt like such an exciting place to be present. That would be have been such an extraordinary effort to conceptualize. Not a chance in hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I asked that, and thank you for all of the context because it's super helpful. And I asked the question because I recently had my son home, who's now 26, and I, as the observer and the witness of this whole experience, I was having a hard time believing how healthy and productive and amazing he is
Yeah.
and what a life he has now. And I was like, wait, how is this the same person? Like, can this actually be the same person? And when you're in that, can you even possibly know that you get to have a life? Like, you get all the stuff that life
Yeah.
has out there. You get to have that if you can break free of this. So I just, thinking of what a contrast that must have been.
Yeah, and it's interesting is because I'm coming up on 11 years in October, and I try to think about how old was I when the substance use became substance abuse,
Yeah.
and how long I lived in that disordered state. And I'm pretty sure 11 years will be a point where I have been this person longer than the life I was looking for. For the first time, this is now the majority of my life.
Right.
And that's a unique and kind of interesting thing to consider. Wow, like I am now mostly this person in
Yeah.
terms of the context of my life.
Yeah, what a tipping point to
Right.
be able to look back on that. I would love to I was thinking about sort of all the different stories that I hear, and I often will say to a guest in particular, wow, it sounds like it could be a Netflix series, right? Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, all these things that happen. So I'm wondering if this was going to be a Netflix show,
Yeah.
what would the pilot look like? Like, where would you go back to in your
Yeah.
life to film the pilot for the Adam Said show?
I tell you what, you know, I always like episodes that don't take place in a single point in time, but that they're kind of rooted in one timeline, but then they kind of flash back to
Yeah.
other points that kind of give context to what you're witnessing. I would do week I would have the first episode take place within the first 2 weeks of sober living.
Mm.
I think when I look back at my story and I think about what was the most profoundly impactful environment for me to start to really become an architect of a life that felt like a meaningful place to be. Uh, Reverse engineer the experience of feeling meaningfully alive. I think about the 10 months that I spent in sober living.
Yeah.
Rehab the rehab hospital setting is fantastic because it's an amazing way to, with unbelievable certainty, divorce an individual from their substance, which is fantastic.
Sure.
You have to do that. And then medically supervise those first 28 days where there could be some medical condition that arises that's been hidden by the substance use or as a result of removing the substance use. But not a lot of actual profound change really takes place within those first 28 days. It's really just a safe way to spend a significant amount of time away from your substance, except that maybe its place in your life is a real problem. And then you go on to what I consider like the first real steps of transformation. And sober living was that for me. It's where you pretty much have to like learn how to live your life doing things other than using,
Yeah.
right? Which is because I don't like to say I I don't tell people well, I'll say this. I tell people all the time, I don't spend a moment's time avoiding substances. I'm not in the abstinence game. I
Mhm.
happen to not use,
Right.
but that is a result of it's a symptom of the intentional and very appropriate replacements that I've made in my life.
Yes.
How I've reorganized my life around very different behaviors that seem to create or at least help me build a life that I want to wake up and be present for. there's also it's also just like I don't know how there hasn't been a Netflix series about sober living because
Right?
there's so many phenomenal characters and stories and people and relationships and things that happen that you just can't make up. I mean, my goodness. So, but I think it would be that because that's really where I was kind of forced to figure out, okay, how am I gonna do this thing? Because in rehab, they make your bed, they give you food, you do all they do everything for you. In sober living, you got to learn how to do all this yourself. So I
Yes.
think it would be there.
All right. So we would start in sober living, and I want to get to the study that you did on Whole Foods
Yeah.
in sober living. But you had mentioned that your relationships had pretty much gone to pot, and not that pot, the other pots. Um, and and that this really started when you were in high school,
Mhm.
when you started to misuse. But
Yes.
what we know is that that tends to be the outcome of something that happens earlier. So just wondering what that experience looked like for you to the point where you ended up using Adderall. And I think it's interesting that you made the distinction of using Adderall as prescribed
Yeah.
versus recreationally, because I
Yeah.
know that happens a lot. So just sort of, um, you know, what was the dynamics like with your parents
Yeah.
as you were kind of going along, not feeling super comfortable in the world, feeling like you were a little overweight and maybe some awkwardness? What would that episode of the story look like?
Well, I think when I was little, by the time I was about 10 years old, that's when I started to not only receive verbal criticism about my weight and my food choices, and I think this is really important. So I never really felt confident or safe in my body until sober living. That was an experience that I was able to finally figure out while I was in recovery. I was given a lot of messages growing up that there were conditions upon which you were allowed to accept yourself physically. That you know you shouldn't really be proud of yourself unless you are a certain, unless you look a certain way. These weren't the actual words that were said, but here's why. I would get criticisms. My parents would notice you have love handles. Why do you have love handles? I don't. 10 years old. Don't know what the heck that means. Um, and that's all well and good. I understand. My parents were concerned. My dad has lost a significant number of very close family members to preventable conditions. Um, uh, his dad died of colon cancer. His sister died of uncontrolled diabetes, and so she went into heart failure. His mom survived a heart attack and breast cancer, and then she died in an accident. And she wouldn't have died had she not been on a medication called Coumadin that she had to have been on because of the condition she was on. And so my dad was clearly has some uh, there's a trigger there when he noticed something about someone he loves, and he's like, "Oh, that could be a threat. That could be a threat to my son in 10 years. I better fix that problem.
Right.
'Cause my son means the world to me, and I'm a type A problem solver. So I'm just gonna tell him there's a problem. I'm gonna reiterate every time I see that problem and let him know it's a problem. But here's the thing, I grew up with my dad, he looked like Captain America,
Mm.
okay? Yeah, he was a basketball player, captain of the high school basketball team, played basketball, into college a little bit, and then he picked up marathon running, and he played softball, and he did this. He'd come in from running every single day with the six-pack abs and the biceps, and then I would witness him and listen to him criticize his own body.
Sure.
Just gosh, I can't believe I ate that. Why would I do that? No, I know I got to lose like 5 more pounds. And I'm like,
Mm.
so what I really believe is that while yes, having those messages directed at me were damaging and hurtful, but witnessing my dad not accept his own body when he looked like that I think that was a very profound experience for me because here I am, certainly looking nothing like my dad. And if that's not lovable and I look like this, what chance do I have of ever, number one, not hearing my dad say those things to me, but number two, ever feel like I'm good enough for myself? And I tell parents this a lot. You can worry about the things you say to your kids all day long, but the way that you talk about yourself in the presence of your kids is equally, if not more, destructive because that messaging, that dialogue that you talk to yourself out loud, that will be an instrument that your child uses to craft their own internal dialogue.
Yes.
And that's what happened to me. And so I would spend 10 years from age 10 to age 20, just constantly believing that my body was this adversarial opponent that I was unfortunate to have been born into. And that every single day was a battle of strength and determination and restriction and exertion in order to outcompete this enemy that I was living in and see a number on a scale go down 2 points and get all excited and the next day go up 3 points and just I mean it was I really was and the thing is while I didn't like the way that I looked, I so much loved what my body was able to do for me. I loved that I was an athletic kid. I loved that I liked to go skating and I liked to play basketball and I liked to play baseball and I liked to play football. And I wish that I had been given permission to love more what my body does for me
Right.
and what it looks like.
Yeah.
And I say this all the time. Falling in love with the body that you live in is first recognizing that loving what it does for you is more valuable than loving what it looks like.
Yes.
The ability to wake up into a body that is a vehicle that can allow you to experience the things in life that you love the most. And I came to this relationship of what I call it this because of I adopted this term from a friend of mine, Dr. Tara Kemp, a caretaker role. That when I was in sober living, I had a conversation with my house manager, Phil Hamburger, and Phil was asking me about my surviving experience when I survived suicide, and I attempted by overdose. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, and I had a very profound experience of which is a very common one, which is men's relief. Um,
Mm.
just I mean, I to this day I know that up until I attempted, I thought I wanted my life to end. But it was the second that I realized I had failed at ending my life that I realized I was so grateful to still be a part of this world and that suicide is, in every single case, someone wanting to end pain.
Mm.
Period. End of story. Whether that suicide is justified or not, like let's say an individual has an end stage terminal disease that is so painful and all they want to do is end it. It's still not them wanting to end their life.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they could save their life, they would. They don't want to end, they don't want to end their life. They want to end their pain. I was talking with Phil and we kind of came to this conversation. And afterwards I was sitting there and just thinking about it. And this kind of epiphany came to me. What happened was my body wouldn't let me die because my body's entire purpose for existing is to keep me alive.
Right.
That's what its job is to help me survive to tomorrow and to try to do that in the best way that it can. In fact, my body has been doing that every single day since the day I was born. My body is the greatest ally I have ever had in my entire life. The fact that I would abuse substances to the extreme degree that I abuse them um, on a daily basis, and I never, ever, ever once had a situation where my life almost ended until I intentionally tried to do it. My body was like, "We are never going to give up on you. You are. We will fight for you until the day that you die." my body is an ally. And what you do with allies is you give them what they need to give you the best opportunity, period, end of story. If that's the case, restriction and abstinence will never work.
Right, right.
You restrict an adversary, you aid an ally. And so what I needed to do was figure out what are the things that I have to actually go out and do, not avoid. What are the actions that are going to start to care for my body's desire to create health, wellness, and a sense of feeling alive? And that's really where this kind of, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, what is the right, most accurate thing I can do? And that's where I kind of came on to plant-based nutrition and really kind of moving away from the traditional AA model of counting days I didn't use and avoiding and all that kind of stuff. And I really found myself attracted to thought leaders like Dr. Gabor Mate and people like Johann Hari and the work that he wrote about as a journalist and with all these other thought leaders, and very much so found myself in the presence of probably the one other than Rip Esselstyn, who was the individual who mentored me into a plant-based lifestyle. There's probably only one other person who has had more of a profound impact on my life than anyone in the world in terms of their work, and that's Doug Lisle. Doug Lisle is an evolutionary psychologist who wrote the book called The Pleasure Trap, which is essentially explaining the biological the biological mechanisms that compel behavior. That what we have is we have a psychological and motivational architecture that responds to the environment that we're in and is able to make very specific and very accurate decisions based on that environment and the stimulus within that environment in order to survive environments if it is appropriate to our natural history and our natural behavior. That once you start to introduce supernormal stimulus, a stimulus that is not supposed to be there, that is not representative of that animal's natural history, natural behavior, that animal will now run the threat of making decisions that are potentially fatal, all the while thinking and feeling like it's doing a very successful thing. And that's really useful.
Yeah.
So, what that helped me figure out is what I need to do is I don't need to be a more disciplined person. I need to build a very disciplined environment. If I can build a very specific, a very appropriate environment that is conducive to the well-being of my motivational architecture and to the well-being of my psychology, I am a lot more likely to engage in an appropriate choice that suits not only my short-term goals but my long-term goals without discipline, right? So willpower is just
Yeah.
it's a nonsense trap.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating that it took your surviving suicide attempt to reconcile with your body
Yeah.
how it was protecting you and keeping you like, it was fighting so hard. It's like,
So
"Dude,
hard.
we're not going down."
Yeah. And that's for
We're
anybody listening
not.
that is well, I'm not that special. I was able to reverse diabetes, heart disease, erectile dysfunction, lose 150 pounds in a year, get off every single psych med as a result of being an architect of a very specific environment, one that looked like a whole food plant-based environment, one that looked like an environment of a community of shared respect, um, uh, uh, a community of shared respect where I could share a specific purpose. And through the employment of both of those things, plant based diet, community, and purpose, I could start to create a future that felt a lot safer and seemed to make a lot more sense to my psychology. And as a result of that, I was able to develop self esteem and resilience. Right. So
Yeah.
self esteem is a sense that you have something of value that you can share with other people and that those individuals will find it valuable for themselves. And resilience is, in my opinion, we know that resilience is about the ability to be confronted with a difficult moment and then draw upon newly learned or already known tools that will move you through that moment in a positive way. But I think that the ability to be resilient is dependent upon a future you want to get to, right? There has to be something about tomorrow that you're excited about, or else the resilience is not valuable to you. There's no urgency to be resilient in a moment if the moment after that isn't worth getting to.
Yes.
And so I think that that's really the biggest driver. If I was to say, if I was to take an individual and look at specific markers that could predict long-term recovery, I would pick self-esteem and resilience.
Mm, that is really interesting because I think that's something you don't hear a lot. I
Right.
think you hear, well, we hear about recovery capital, and clearly that's, resilience and self-esteem could be part of those. But I wanted to just go back for a second when you talked about architecting your environment
Yeah.
so that you weren't necessarily restricting yourself and having to, like, lean on willpower to not use today. I wonder if you could just give us some insight into
Yeah.
what does an architected environment look like for somebody who's new in recovery?
Yeah. So first and foremost, you have to understand that nothing about change requires you to be comfortable with it. Okay, so there's always going to be moments when you're in the process of recovery where the ability to do the thing you know you need to do is going to be accompanied by an incredible and extraordinary amount of resistance and discomfort. So you have to have some degree of being willing to be comfortable being very uncomfortable.
Right.
If you're not willing to go to that place and live there for a short period of time and know that it's going to pass, recovery will always feel like a thing that is impossible to you. And so identifying a reason why you're willing to be in that place for 1 hour or 20 minutes, however long it is until you move through it, identifying a reason or reasons why it matters so much is really important. We hear this all the time, right? Identify your why, but most of the time people identify their why by the negative consequence. Why do you want to do this? Or they'll say things like, why don't you want to use? No one stops using. They start doing something else.
Yeah.
So the question should be, why do you want to do something other than use?
Yes.
Likely what they'll say is, well, I don't want to die. Yeah, obviously. Well, then the next question is, why not? And they'll go on to another layer. They'll say, well, because, I would really, I have people in my life that matter a lot to me and I want to be here. Why? Well, because, I've got grandkids now, or I've got kids now, and I want to see them. Why do you want to see them do it? At a certain point in time, you're going to get to an answer that looks like this: because I love X. That's the end.
Yeah.
Because I love them, because I love my family, because I love the ability to share myself with those people or with that thing or with that action. Your why has to be rooted in a loving and meaningful bond that gives you the experience that life is meaningful. Negative consequences are wonderful things. The reason they're so wonderful is because they let you know something incredibly meaningful and important in your life is being threatened.
Is that risk?
Something that matters the world to you is at risk. Whatever that thing is, that's your why. You're not removing the consequence, you're protecting the loving and meaningful bond. So really digging down, really getting yourself to investigate, what is that loving and meaningful thing? What is the loving and meaningful bond, or and likely bonds that are going to help you um, make specific decisions that get you towards protection of those things. I think Johan Hari has a great list. He has about 9 what he calls causes of depression, and he'll list them as disconnections from X, Y, and Z. And I think we can flip that. We can say that there's about 5 to 9 loving and meaningful bonds that are important to feel meaningfully alive, and those are a loving and meaningful bond with yourself, both physically and emotionally, that you want to show up and be present for every single day. A loving and meaningful bond with people in your life that you want to show up and be present for every single day. A loving and meaningful bond with a purpose that you can share within a community of shared respect that you want to be present for every single day. A loving and meaningful bond with the natural world that you want to show up and be present for every single day. A loving and meaningful bond with meaningful work that you can show up and be present for every single day, and a loving and meaningful bond with a future that feels safe and makes sense that you can show up and work for every single day. When those loving and meaningful bonds are fully connected, the desire to show up and be truly present is incredibly high. It matters a lot to you. And so the opportunity to use, it may not be less, but the desire to use will be greatly diminished. The reason for that is using will remove you from being present for those loving and meaningful bonds that mean the most to you.
Yeah.
So for me, I needed to be the architect of a body that for the first time ever felt like a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be. So, how do we start to build an environment that allows that to take place over the course of time? I mentioned the name Rip Esselstyn. He's the author of his original book was called The Engine 2 Diet. He's the founder of Plant Strong. His dad is the famous Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn from the Cleveland Clinic, who worked with Bill Clinton to help him reverse his cardiovascular disease. And Rip has been the feature of documentaries like Forks Over Knives. He's the executive producer of The Game Changers. This guy is a multi New York Times bestselling author and health advocate and a real expert in using plant based nutrition to reverse chronic disease in individuals. And I said, I don't know anything about nutrition. I don't know anything about mental health or addiction, but I can put food on a plate. So I'm going to put the food that guy says onto my plate and let's just see what happens. So great. Now I know what I want to do. Next step is figuring out not only how to do it, but how to do it with ease and repeatability. If you're
Right.
going to be the architect of a specific environment, ease and repeatability have to be built into the environment, or you will be attracted to your old behavior more often than you want. Remember, every instinct in you is trying to figure out how to get the most for the least. How do I get the most pleasure for the least amount of pain and the least amount of energy? In environments of scarcity and competition, which is the environment that we spent the majority of our evolutionary story as a species, a psychology of more for less will always survive to tomorrow. It is a very good psychology and motivational architecture to have, is one that's trying to get as much as it can for as little as it can.
Yes.
So we are really attracted to that kind of opportunity. So if your new behaviors cost you more time and energy than your old behaviors, you're going to want your old behaviors more often than is good for you. So instead of trying to figure out how many recipes can I make, I wanted to figure out what were the easiest foods to make. So I found out microwavable oatmeal, canned beans, microwavable rice, fruit that I could just grab like bananas and apples and berries and stuff like that. And I wanted my environment flooded with them all the time. I wanted it to take no more than 5 minutes to make a meal. I could eat it in 10 and clean it up in five. All right. So that meant all I need is 20 minutes and I'm going to have the most successful opportunity for me. And I also told myself the kitchen is I only go into the kitchen to make food I've decided I'm going to eat. I don't go into it to figure out what I want to eat.
Oh.
That is a very attractive environment to make a choice I don't want to make, especially when I'm living with
Yes.
10 other guys.
Yes. And I was gonna say you were making these decisions while you're newly in sober living, right? This
Yeah,
was like
exactly.
your launch into your new life.
Yeah, and so I had written out a plan. I remember in the first week I was there, I wrote out a meal plan, and I was trying to think back to like Rip, and I had heard him. I went to a 7 day retreat with him that my dad had dragged me to, and I remembered some of the foods that they made there, and I was like, okay, they had a bunch of stuff for breakfast, but I remember they had oatmeal every single day. Great, oatmeal for breakfast. Write it down. Gosh, I remember they talked about rice and beans about more so than anything else I can remember. So rice and beans for lunch with some kind of salsa or something like that, and frozen veggies like peas, carrots, corn that I could heat up and throw in there. And then for dinner, I remember we had one day where it was sweet potatoes with lentils, and I was like, great, potatoes and lentils. That's easy. I can microwave the potato. I can take canned lentils. I can pour it on. This is so simple, fantastic. That's day one. Then I looked, and there's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, left to right. I'm like, what? So I just took my pencil, I drew a line from Monday all the way through Sunday with an arrow at the end of it, and above it wrote repeat.
I love it.
And I was just like, I'm just
I
gonna
love it.
what I had done was and I didn't know this at the time, but I had employed a strategy that's actually really, really very effective, which is make it so simple and obvious that it's nearly impossible not to do the healing thing.
Mm.
I knew exactly what I was gonna eat, when I was gonna eat, how long it was going to take to make it, the amount of resources required to complete the task. That's really useful. A lot of people want to try to define the rest of their life. They go, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be sober for the rest of my life. I'm going to eat a healthy diet for the rest of my life. I'm going to tell you right now that is actually a very detrimental thing
Mhm.
to do. And the reason for that is your brain cannot conceptualize that amount of time.
No.
In fact, it's very difficult for your brain to conceptualize beyond 4 weeks. There's a lot of data on this. Uh, if I was to go to someone and they say, "Hey, Adam, can you help me adopt a plant based diet?" I'm really curious to do that. I go, "Sure. All right. I'm going to give you these recipes. Now do this forever." What's happening is their brain is really trying to conceptualize how much time, energy, and resources is required to do the entire task,
Right.
and it can't. And it's trying to figure this out, and it's getting very frustrated. And then anytime that individual makes a choice that doesn't look like their goal, meaning that they make a choice that looks like, animal products to some degree, or hyper processed junk food, what they're doing is they're sending a signal. They're sending a signal to their brain that says, "See, we can't do this for the rest of our life. I
It's
keep
hard.
we keep seeing that we can't do this. We should just not do this." If I was to say to that same person, "Hey, here's what you're going to do. You're going to eat oatmeal with fruit every morning for 7 days." What's happening is the brain is like, okay, that's like 1 or 2 containers from the store of oats. I can just grab some strawberries and blueberries. I know exactly how much to buy. I also know it probably takes like 5 minutes to cook the oats every morning. So I probably need to give myself about 20 minutes every morning. You are creating a real sense of actual resource and time management that's achievable for that individual. Now the brain and the cell feels safe. You've also given yourself an endpoint. The end of the 7 days, if I didn't like that, I could do something different.
Right,
That
right.
allows them to engage in the behavior in the sense of, I'm just trying to see what kind of value exists here.
Yeah.
Just trying to get a little sense of, does this seem like a good thing to continue doing or not? That's valuable because now they're scientists, now they're explorers.
Yes.
Now they're not trying to find out if they're going to be failures or successes. They're trying to find out if this seems accurate or not. And that's really useful. So I kind of
Build
employed that strategy.
Yeah, well, and you're building that self-efficacy just one day at a time where it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, I did that yesterday, I did it today, it
Yeah.
worked."
I told
So
people that the first 10 months of my recovery were a series of 2 week experiments. That's all I was doing, was running 2 week experiments. And then I'd take a look back at those 2 weeks and go, did what I added to my life, does it seem to be moving me in the direction that I want to go? And does it seem to be easy enough to do? And if the answer is yes, I'm now motivated to repeat that experiment and see if I get similar or better results.
yeah. I would love to go back. I think when you were talking about the why and the 5 or 6 reasons, and things that people need to build, those connections
Yeah.
that they need to build, I'm really curious because as I'm hearing you talk about those, it's making so much sense. And then I'm thinking about my son and all my I call 'em my work kids that are in active addiction or dependence.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they could think through that.
Yeah.
So how does that walk us through how does somebody get to the point where they can start thinking about those things?
Yeah, because that's a really good point you bring up because in that early stage of recovery, the idea of figuring out how to like reestablish those meaningful connections is like, I don't even know how I lost them. Like
Right.
I can't identify the day when they left. Yeah, the question of how did we get here? How
Or
like
those
if you
people
think
aren't
about
even talking to me anymore, right?
yeah,
Like I have
exactly,
completely
exactly.
fractured all of those relationships.
Exactly. And so, that is what I would tell this individual is to number one, I think this is so important that for individuals who are in the midst of substance use disorder, who are dealing with crippling anxiety and depression because they consistently um, co-occur, is that everything that you feel, everything that you're feeling, and everything that you struggle with makes complete sense. That you are not an example of psychology gone wrong. Your situation and the way that you're behaving in response to that situation is not a failure of you. It is likely a failure of the environment that you either found yourself in or unknowingly crafted for yourself in response to things that had happened in your life, what is occurring for you at this moment, and the sense of what your future looks like at this point in time.
Mhm.
The majority of people, their use looks and feels to them exactly like self care. It is a misguided self-care act, and it's misguided because the stimulus that they're using is so intense. It creates a pleasure response that is so far outside the bounds of what is considered reasonable for our natural history and natural behavior that it disrupts the balance of our ability to make short-term, intermediate, and long-term course of action decisions. So we're not able to recognize that in 5 years, this might be a real problem. We might be now displacing things that are valuable for our long-term goals by introducing this supernormal stimulus. I'll give you an example. Doug Lyle, in his talk, The Pleasure Trap, he has a TED talk. He shares an example of what happens if you go outside and you leave your porch light on. Well, if you go outside and you leave your porch light on, what you're going to notice for the majority of times, you're going to notice that moths are fluttering to that light. And the reason that they're fluttering to that light is because they're actually designed by nature to use the brightest light in the sky as navigation. They use celestial objects as navigation. But when the brightest light in the sky is now your porch light, this animal is now its guidance system is misguided, and it's going to hit this light, and then it's going to flutter down, and then it's going to hit it again. It's going to hit it again. It's going to hit it again, and eventually it's going to die. And what we can do is, if we were to look at this situation from a subjective point of view, what we're going to recognize is that what is occurring is that by introducing a supernormal stimulus, a stimulus that is not supposed to be in the environment, a supernormal stimulus that is not representative of that animal's natural history and natural behavior, that animal now ended up making decisions that were fatal the whole time, thinking and feeling like it was making incredibly successful choices. That's really useful for that individual who's struggling with substance use. The stimulus that has been introduced into the environment and then consistently introduced in the environment is so beyond the experience of what stimulus looked like for us as a species that it feels so right. It feels like such a successful thing to do that it is incredibly attractive to your motivational system. And you're going to feel an incredible sense of compulsion towards that because you're thinking and feeling like you're being biologically successful when in fact you're self destructive. That is not because you don't have enough willpower. That is not because you are an undisciplined human, and is not because you have a lack of moral character. It is because the environment has been so profoundly shifted away from what is easy for your guidance system, your psychological and your motivational architecture to figure out how to do well. Does that make sense?
It totally does.
So
And
perhaps
I
who's like, how do I get back to like a sense of homeostasis and start to reestablish connection? Number one, you have to reorganize your environment. You have to reorganize your environment to look enough like the life you want to live. If that's a healthy, plant rich life that allows you to move every single day, you've got to craft an environment for yourself within your home that looks like your goals. This will allow your neurotransmitters, your dopamine receptors, and your dopamine is your guidance system. So a lot of people talk about dopamine in a negative context. Don't do anything that stimulates dopamine. You don't want to do that. No, you do. Dopamine is the specific neurotransmitter that helped us figure out how to survive environments of scarcity and to do really well.
yeah.
It is a guidance system that is helping you figure out what's the right move to make. But because the modern environment has introduced stimulus that have responded or causes your dopamine system to respond with such intense lifts in dopamine circuitry, your receptors have defended themselves against that intense stimulus and they've dulled the receptivity. You have to restore dopamine sensitivity. And the way that you do that is to craft an environment where you don't have very intense stimulus. Essentially, you're going to put these receptors under deprivation. And so the question is, well, how long does it take to restore dopamine sensitivity? Well, the studies on this show that it's about a 4-month journey. But here's the cool thing. It's not a linear path. 80% of that journey occurs within the first 2 weeks. So if you can craft an environment that looks exactly like the life you want to live and live in that environment for 2 weeks, be comfortable being uncomfortable, just be in that environment for 2 weeks. After those 2 weeks, your response to that environment is going to look and feel incredibly different. It is going to be a seemingly less difficult place to live in. You're going to be guided to decisions in a way that didn't feel like that on day one. And you're going to notice this seems like a good place to be.
That is I love the moth and the, porch light
Yeah.
because I think it's a good reminder to for parents to when you're watching the behavior your child and you're scratching your head
Yeah.
wondering how can my little moth be hitting the porch
Right.
light?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that cocaine or that fentanyl or whatever it is, that THC, that's the porch light. And
Yeah.
of course they are hitting their head against it because that's how it works.
And then we have to take a step further from there because we can blame the stimulus 100% if we want to, but we also have to recognize that what will occur, that situation will occur for a certain amount of the population and it won't for another amount of the population. I mean, there's going to be
Right.
a compulsion and attraction to it no matter what. But Professor Bruce Alexander in the 1970s ran a study called Rat Park. And maybe you've heard of Rat Park.
Yeah.
So Rat Park is a great study because what he did was he observed the rat in the cage study. When the rat in the cage study was he put a rat in a cage and you give it food and water or you give it drugs. And what it's going to do is once it figures out how to get the drugs, what it's going to do is it's just going to do the drugs every single day and eventually it's going to die. And that's kind of what they use to craft this story about addiction, that addiction is a response to the chemical hooks in substances. And that if you just did it long enough, that you're gonna become addicted to it and you'll avoid the rest of your life and you'll die. Bruce Alexander said, hang on a second. They put a rat in an empty cage. He has no option other than to just eat food or do drugs. That's not life. Why don't we simulate heaven for rats? And so he created this thing called Rat Park, which essentially was heaven for rats. There was all the things that rats would do in the meaningful experience of life of being a rat. There was, things to dig in, tunnels to go through. There was loads of colored balls and food that it loved. And there were other rats to have a meaningful experience. And what he noticed was when he introduced cocaine into Rat Park, none of the rats ever used it compulsively. None of them ever habitually used it, and none of them ever overdosed. So, what if addiction isn't a response to the chemical hooks? What if it's an adaptation to your cage? What if it is the most appropriate response to a life cut off from what makes life feel meaningful? If you are that individual who is experiencing the severance of meaningful purpose and meaningful connection in your life, that porch light is going to be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
If you are a person who has either currently has established connection, meaningful connection in their life, or has reestablished meaningful connection, that porch light is just going to be a pretty thing to look at every now and then. It's
Right.
not going to be the same compulsive attraction. That's really important. So, to answer your original question, how do we start to do this? Number one thing is we have to understand that the response we have to that porch light in both situations is appropriate. It makes sense. If you are someone who looks at that porch light and goes, oh my gosh, all I want is more of that porch light, that is a signal that says there are things in your life that need to be cared for.
Mhm.
You aren't a person who is different from someone else. You're not that individual who is the born addict who is just always going to have this problem. What's happening likely is that there's a reasonable and appropriate amount of connection and meaning in your life that is not being cared for. So we have to start figuring out what's the first meaningful bond and connection that we can start to care for in the best way possible.
Right.
And so it might be your health. It might be being of service. You could just go and start volunteering for different things and find something that kind of lights you up. It could be learning to do something valuable. You learn to play music, learn to speak a new language, gain some kind of value that could be valuable to other people.
Yeah, I think when I think about that porch light, it helps when I think about shame and how
Yeah.
parents often try to shame and sort of blame our kids, like, "Can't you see what you're doing?" And I don't know what your experience was with your parents while they were observing you going through this, but I think we're so desperate as parents to find a way into a conversation
Yeah.
that will be impactful, and I think often what we end up doing is shaming and blaming, not intentionally. I think we
Right.
say and do things that we think are being really helpful. Maybe like your dad was thinking he was being really helpful because
Yeah.
he cares so much for you and he doesn't want to see his son end up, having a heart attack or whatever. So maybe talk a little bit about some of the things that you think, having been through that experience,
Yeah.
parents might be doing or saying that might not be coming across with the right intention or that could be more helpful.
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you're someone who is a parent or a loved one who cares for someone who is struggling with substance use disorder, you have to really take a step back because you're not going to understand what it feels like for them when they use. And the reason is because you don't know what it feels like to them when they don't. And so for them, their use in their mind is a very meaningful and valuable part of their life. It is the only way that they can completely and truly care for a pain that cannot be cared for immediately in the way that it does with substance use on a daily basis. Russell Brand, the comedian, actor, now kind of lifestyle podcast host and comment pundit, um, he has a beautiful quote about addiction. He says the priority of every addict is to pacify the passage of time through some kind of purchased relief. That's a beautiful way to express addiction. And when you pair it with Johann Hari's quote about addiction, he said, "What if addiction is about not wanting to be present in your life because your life is too painful a place to be?" If we can understand that, to the person who is a witness to someone struggling, you have to understand that more so than a solution to their use, people who are struggling with that kind of pain want to know that they have not been forgotten by the people who matter the most to them. We don't want you to solve our problems. We want to be reminded that if ever we figure out a way to not use this, we're still welcomed back into that life that includes you. There's a very specific way that you can do that. You can call this person if they're not an immediate family member, or if they are, if they live with you, you can just say to them, first and foremost, I love you. And I'm going to love you whether you keep using or you don't. I don't know how to solve this problem, but if you'd like, I can sit with you and we can help figure this thing out together because I don't want you to be alone or feel alone. What you're telling them is that their use isn't a thing that causes you to see them as less valuable, that they're not less important to you because they use. That what you want more so than anything is for them to remember, or I would say this thing you can do is to remind them that that is who they will always be. And I would really like it if we could start this conversation today. Because there's a threat. That's the thing. What the only reason you want them to stop is because you don't want to lose them. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. And so what's important is letting them know that they matter. That is the most important thing. You're not an expert. Even if you are, if they're your child, you're not an expert, okay? You don't get to be an expert and their parent. I'm sorry, you don't. You can be one or the other. And I'm asking you, if you're that person, to please be the other. You can be the parent. Be the parent that says, my job is to let you know you're loved no matter what, and let's figure this out together. I'm not the person who's going to figure this out. We're going to go together. I'm going to walk this journey with you. I will be waiting for you at the end, and these doors will be open, and you have a place to come home to. If that's what you say, that is the most, and they may say no.
Right. I was gonna say, and then you're met with huge resistance.
And they may say no, and you have to love them anyways.
Yeah.
You have to set boundaries. Boundaries are important, right? If their presence in your life is a threat to you and to other people, there are boundaries that have to be set. But I find that the threat mentality, the kind of intervention where you say, what we're going to do is we're going to take this lingering thread of loving, meaningful bonding in your life, and we're going to threaten it unless you get sober. Like that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Yes.
Um, I don't think you can. There was a quote that says, "Tough and love shouldn't be put together." Um, that what you should do is you should speak from your heart. That remember that the use isn't the problem. The problem is you might lose them. That's what you need to let them know. That's what's worrying you. Their use doesn't bother you. The fact that their use can cost them their place in your life, that bothers you.
That's the huge distinction, and I think really, really important. I often say, what like when I have the beautiful ability to talk to my son, and I tell him, it was less about fentanyl. It's more like if, well, this is a bad example to get with you, broccoli, but
Sure.
let's say it was Cheetos. If Cheetos were going to kill you potentially this afternoon, I wouldn't want you to use the Cheetos. It's
Yeah.
not that particular substance. So I love how you just said that.
I I would
Um,
say I would say this, we have to stop asking addicts, "Why won't you stop?" That's a very, I think it's a dangerous thing to ask them. "How do we get you to stop?" Or, "You need to stop using," or, "Why won't you stop?" A much more valuable question to ask that person is, "I wanna know why your use means so much to you.
right.
Tell me why your use makes so much sense for you." If that person is able to answer that question, we have a much greater opportunity of understanding which direction to go. Because there are ways to abstain from use that aren't very valuable to your long-term health, right? I can say, "Hey, well, great. Guess what? You know what's really great for down-regulating withdrawal symptoms of heroin? Donuts." This is true.
Yeah.
I don't want them eating donuts all day every day. It's just, there's still a threat there. What I really want to know is why, for you, is youth such a valuable and important thing to hold on to so tightly? Why does it make so much sense? That's a better question to ask.
Do you think you could have answered that while you were actively using if somebody had sat down with you and asked you that?
I don't know if I could have immediately, but I wouldn't have felt as offended because why won't you stop means that what they're saying is, why can't you be like me?
Right.
And it's really important to recognize when you think about it from the standpoint of evolutionary psychology, there's an aspect called the ego trap. And the ego trap is essentially that's someone asking that question, why won't you stop? So for the person who's using and is caught up in their use and they're in the end stages of substance use disorder, when they look out outside their window and they see their life and they see their families, what they see is people who spend all day long not using. And their use costs them no energy. It costs them no effort. It's a very effortless thing for them not to use. So for that individual who can't stop using, if they were to just stop using, not only would it require extraordinary effort to achieve, it would not be something worthy of applause because people in their life do that every single day.
Right. Welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club. Well, welcome back to regular life.
Yeah.
So the idea of asking someone, why can't you stop, is literally throwing that ego trap on top of them because they're going to say, I don't know. And what they're saying is, I don't know. You do. I'm not as good as you. Clearly, I don't know how to do life. Instead of, hey, look, you know, if I were in your situation, my life would feel incredibly overwhelming. How you deal with that discomfort every day is a marvel to me. All I want to know is, why does your use mean so much to you? Why does it make so much sense? Why, for if it were me, would it make so much sense for me to do the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Now we're on the same level. Now we're the same person. That's important. You
That's
have to level the
that's
playing field.
yeah, it is a more level playing field and um oh, I forgot what I had something I was going to ask you and I
What?
forgot what it was. It'll come back. Um but that just turned the insight there is just so turned on its head
Yeah.
because the natural thing is to just say, "Why can't you just stop?"
Because for us, for someone who's witnessing someone who doesn't deal with substance use disorder, use makes no sense.
Correct.
Use is not something I would want to do every single day because my life is something I want to be present for. So what we have to understand is, what does this situation looks like? What does the situation look like where if it were me, it would make sense to me? I need you to tell me. Why does your use make sense? Because if it does, what that means is if I were you, I would do the exact same thing. I want to know why because I don't know. And you're not broken. You're an incredibly strong person. You're an amazing person, and I don't understand. It must make sense. So let's be the same person here.
Right, right. What I was gonna ask is, do you think there are some inflection points in this journey where this conversation might be more successful than other
Yeah.
times?
Yeah, so I think, if an individual goes in the rehab hospital setting, that's not the place to have this conversation. It really isn't. Rehab sucks. Uh, it does. And the reason why it does is because it's abrupt and it's immediate.
Yeah.
And everything that you do to soothe your life is halted. You're forced into an environment that doesn't look like an environment of your choosing. You're forced into having conversations that are very difficult to have. And so, really, what that situation is, if you could just say, "Hey, look, I'm here to safely stop for the first time. I want to be medically observed because if I go into painful withdrawals, if I go into delirium tremens, if something happens, I need you to save my life. That's why I'm here." When you move on to that next stage, when you go into intensive outpatient therapy, or you go into a partial hospitalization program, or you go into a sober living facility, that's where you really want to start having those conversations. And the reason for that is that's when you have control over crafting an environment of your own.
Mm.
You don't have that opportunity in rehab. You are in someone's specific environment that can't be altered.
Right.
And when you're trying to answer that question of why does my use make sense to me, you want to be able to take action on it. You want to be able to start to alter your environment to look more like a life where use doesn't make sense, where use is a far less necessary thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's really important. If we look at someone who's caught up in substance use, and we were to ask them about those loving and meaningful bonds, they're likely going to say that the majority of, if not all of them, have been severed. And so there's nothing that they feel like they want to show up and be present for. They don't have anything valuable to be present for. And the disconnection of those loving and meaningful bonds is a painful experience, and use soothes the passage of time. It's,
Right.
and it's easy and it's repeatable and it's attractive. So of course we're going to do it. If we take
Yeah.
that same person and we restore those meaningful bonds, and we were to put them in a situation where they're in a room with a person. Now they're fully connected. They're fully connected to a loving and meaningful bond with themselves, with other people in their life, with a purpose they share within a community of shared respect, with meaningful work, with the natural world, and a future that makes sense. We put them in a room, and unknowingly we slip heroin into their water, and they drink it, and they do heroin. They're going to have the same euphoric experience that anyone would have on heroin. And after the heroin experience, we're going to say, "Hey, did you notice you were on heroin?" They would go, "Oh yeah, I noticed something. I didn't know it was heroin, but that was intense. Do you want more? I can get you as much as you want." They're far less likely to say yes. And the reason for that is they are aware that using heroin removes their ability to be present for what is so important to them. They might use, but I think that we have to stop defining recovery by how perfectly a person can abstain from
Yes.
use.
Yes.
We need to start defining recovery by how important being present in their life matters to them. If they're a person who goes out on, whatever, and something extraordinary happens, like a tragedy occurs, and they get really upset and they take a shot of liquor and then they go, "Dang it, I don't want to do that anymore." That's not their recovery failing. That's their recovery winning. The recognition that that's not what they want to do. They would have liked to have done it differently, and so they will next time.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
I think that recovery is not the absence of substances. Recovery is the intentional um, reconnection to a life that feels like a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be.
Mm.
When a person has a life that feels like a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be, and at the same time has a sense that their future is an equally or even greater safe, secure, and hopeful place to be, their use is a lot less necessary thing to do. That's what recovery is. Um, and I'm not a big fan of the. I love AA for the sense that it's free. For the sense that in any city, in any in any state, in all of this country, there's a person who, if needed, could get to a safe place and not use, and be surrounded by a group of individuals who know what they're dealing with and believe them. That's valuable. But this idea that creating an idea that the reason why you use is because you're an addict and you always will be is a very damaging and destructive thing to do.
Yeah, I think your point about, it's more about how important is being present is such a better barometer of
Yeah.
that. I just want to shift for a few minutes before I let you go to food. I think it
Yeah.
is so fascinating that food became your really a gateway to your new life, to recovery, and it was also part of the origin of where a lot of the trouble came from.
Mhm.
So you found, and we talked a little bit about your first 2 weeks with oatmeal.
Yeah. Yeah, that ended up being 9 years. I ate oatmeal every morning for 9 years straight.
And what I always wanna be very gentle with on my podcast is what I don't wanna do is have all this information and then parents go and they go to their kid and they go, "Okay, you need to start eating plant
Yeah,
food.
yeah, yeah.
You need to eat oatmeal. You need to do this," right? We don't want that. But so my question would be, because I always think it's very impactful when our kids observe us, just as you observed your dad.
Right.
So if a parent was listening and saying, huh, this food thing's kind of interesting. Maybe I've been kind of toying with my diet and what I'm putting in my body. How could a parent potentially use food as a either a conversation starter, as an entry point with their child? Because I'm gonna tell you that you are not gonna go tell your child that you have to start eating a plant-based diet
Never, never,
because it's
not gonna
probably not gonna be well received. But maybe give us some thoughts on how could we use food in our struggle because parents are really struggling.
So number one, remember food is an act of service to something, right? Whether it's to your longevity, whether it's to how you wake up and perform in sports, whether it's because the composition of an individual's diet depends both on their immediate preferred lifestyle and what type of future they want to have. And so when you're talking with kids, I'll tell you number one, there's not a 9-year-old in the world that cares about their cholesterol. So we can't have that conversation. We can't have, well, did you know that a plant-based diet lowers your cholesterol? It's not going to work. They're not even going to know what you're talking about. But what you want to do is you want to identify what is it that your child does every single day that they love. And it can be, you can say, well, my kid stays inside all day and he plays video games and that's great. It's wonderful. That's a thing. So I'm not saying that video games played all day is a good thing, but there's something that matters to them.
Yeah.
You need to find a way to help that individual, that child, form a meaningful bond between what they love to do and how food makes it better. So what you can say is, let's say your son or your daughter loves, and I mean loves, to go swimming. Right, summer. So they just want to go swimming in the pool all day long, all day long, all day long. You could say things like, "Hey, you know what? I read this thing. I'm not really sure if it's true. This is important. This is a tactic.
Yes.
Not really sure if it's true, but I heard that if you eat oatmeal in the morning, it improves your ability to swim." Now, I don't even know. Like I said, I read this thing, didn't even finish reading it. It seems like it's interesting. You want to try an experiment with me for a week? We'll both eat oatmeal every morning, then we'll go swimming like in the afternoon and see if it's any different. What we're doing is number one, you're using a very specific tactic, and I call it the "it seems for now, not sure" method. Okay. And I got this from Doug Lyle. What you're doing is you're not threatening this child's perception of the foods that they eat and love, thinking that it may have an impact on how they swim. Your child might think that those, you know, cereal that they eat with Batman on it might be making them feel like Batman. They might think that, so we're not going to threaten that.
Right, right.
And the way that you threaten is number one, you have to let them know you are not sure about this thing. I am not an expert, not sure if this is going to work. Okay, so that's number one. Heard this thing, not really sure if I believe it. It seems, not sure, it seems. Next part is, seems like it might be really interesting to try, and I want to try it. So what you're going to do is you're going to offer them to try it. And then the next part is, not sure if it's going to work. It seems, not sure for now. It's a short term deal. Yeah, not really sure. It seems like it's a good idea. I'm not really sure about it. You want to try this for like a week? What
Experiment. That's a great word.
experiment exactly? what you're doing is you're not making it seem like what they already do is the wrong thing. What you're saying is, I don't even know if this is going to work out. And I want you and I to figure this thing out together.
Yeah.
What you're then saying is, if it does work out, your kid could be the one who tells all of their friends that he figured this thing out. Not that it's what your dad or your mom told you had to do in the morning. No, no, no. I ran an experiment. And I figured this thing out on my own. My dad told me about it. He didn't even finish reading this article. He wasn't even really sure. I did this experiment and I figured it out.
Right.
Oatmeal makes me feel great when I swim. Wonderful. Now you got your kid meaningfully and excitedly attached to oatmeal. That's just a step you can take, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of parents want to, and I think this is useful. Like, obviously, parents want to be the ones who deliver knowledge to their kids. But if you give the child a sense that they're the one that figured it out, then they really like the thing. If you tell them they have to do it because you think it's good for them, they're likely to rebel against that thing.
Yeah.
If you come up to them and
Sure.
say, you come up to them and say, hey, seems like remember, I'm not really sure, but it seems like uh black bean burritos are really, really good for individuals who play football. I read this thing. I'm not really sure if it's true. It comes from this really cool guy. He was an athlete. I don't even know if I really believe him, but I would really like to. You what I want to do? Like, I want to eat burritos, rice and bean burrito with you every day. And then when we go play football outside, let's see if it's any different. I want to run this experiment. Like, I'm not sure it's going to work. Let's just do this for now. I
Right.
think it's really cool. Then your child who's 11, who's just getting excited about football, if they eat that every single day and you can get them to feel like it works, like you, when you're out there, like, I think I'm running faster. Do you feel like you're running faster? I think I'm running faster. I'm not sure. You tell me, are we running faster? And your kids go, yeah, I think I'm running faster. You go, I bet maybe it's the burritos. And then when they go and they tell their friends, you guys, I did this thing. It's the burrito experiment.
Bro.
My dad heard about it, but he wasn't sure. So I ran an experiment. I figured it out. Burritos make you run faster in football.
Love it.
It's a tactic that you can use.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it works really well, and you can adjust it to be age appropriate as well. And I think that's always really good.
And
And then you just tell them to watch Game Changers, and then you don't have to
exactly.
do that anymore. No. So,
If it's
well,
funny because that tactic is used specifically for adults who are adopting a new dietary lifestyle because we get rebelled against by our current social
yeah.
group. So when they you come and say, "Yeah, well, you guys, I'm adopting a whole food plant-based diet, and the reason why I'm doing that is because it's the healthiest diet on the planet and it reverses diseases." What you're telling everyone in your group is that, guess what? I figure out that everything that you do is wrong.
Right. Right.
And there's a sense of order, subconscious sense of ranking within a group based on how much value what you do offers other people. And you're threatening that sense of order of everyone. So they're going to have to repel back. You go, oh, where do you get your protein? Where do you do this? They don't want to know. They just want to make it seem like your thing isn't valuable to everyone else in the group.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do is to be like, hey, guys, you come down, you eat lunch, and they notice you're having a rice and bean bowl. You, hey, what's with the rice and bean bowl? I don't know. I heard this thing, not even sure if it's even like good idea, but yeah, I've been doing it for a couple days. It seems to be working, and I'm just going to try it for now. Then they don't care. You're even telling them it's the best thing in the world. You're not even sure you want to do it forever. You're just trying it for now, and in a week you'll go, "Hey guys, guess what?" And their thought is in a week when it doesn't work, then you're going to come out and go, "Guys, remember that diet I tried? Not a good idea." You're just disarming everybody.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, I have to let you go, but I just think there's so many golden gems in here for parents to hear and for young people to hear as well if they're listening. So if you had to sort of give one thought to a parent who's listening who's got a 17-year-old who's dealing the Adderall at high school or, vaping every morning before they go to school, what would you say?
Well, number one, just remember that for that person that you're witnessing, what they do to them makes complete sense. There's something about the world that they live in that doesn't feel like a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be. Something about it that doesn't make sense, and that you seems to care for that lack of sense or that lack of comfort or that lack of safety. It cares for it in a way that feels like self-love and self-care. So to them, it doesn't look as crazy. And to them, it certainly doesn't feel like crazy. It feels very rational, very reasonable thing to repeat. So you have to recognize that to that person, there's something about that use that fits into their world appropriately. So Telling them to stop it immediately might scare them off because its absence is difficult for them. Okay, so the most important thing is that if you're that person who wants to, what you want to do is not figure out how to get them to stop. You want to figure out why does it make so much sense that they use. Remember that for addiction, this is really important. When someone is hurting, they're going to do almost anything they can to be something other than what they are, which is in pain. And they're going to want to do that with the greatest amount of ease and repeatability. And substance use is an amazing way to do that. It's very attractive to that desire to soothe the passage of time. So if you're a parent or you're a friend or you're a loved one who's witnessing someone, the number one thing you can do to them is just remind them that they matter to you. Remind them that they matter whether they're using or you're not. So if they feel like they're losing grips on this thing, that you would be the person that they can come to and talk about it because you are not going to judge them for their use. That you're going to love them whether they use it or not. Um, my, uh, well, I've lost like 7 friends since getting sober. One of them didn't die of a relapse. Unfortunately, he died from complications in surgery. His name was David Clark. Um, David had uh, he was an alcoholic who weighed over 300 pounds, and he found a plant based lifestyle and distance running, and became one of the most accomplished ultra runners in the world. Before he had an injury that landed him in surgery, and then complications to surgery cost him his life. He had the most beautiful quote I've ever heard. Um, we all know the saying that if you want to have, if you want to be happy, you should live like it's the last day of your life. David said, if you think about that, that doesn't actually make sense in terms of longevity. Because if you were to live like it's the last of your life, I certainly wouldn't go to work, certainly wouldn't worry about getting groceries, certainly wouldn't worry about how I eat, wouldn't do any of those things. Wouldn't matter to me. If you really want to be happy, if you really want to have a meaningful experience, you should treat everyone you meet as if they were living the last day of their life. So I want you to consider that in the context of how you relate to your child who's using. If you had one day left with them, what would you say to keep them close to you? You would likely not talk about their substance use. You would likely, with the most intense desire and ability that you have, express to them just how much they truly matter to you and how much their presence in your life matters to you and how much their safety matters to you. And in that conversation, you would likely never even mention the word substance or drugs or anything like that. If you can interact with your child from the standpoint of the importance of their presence in your life, not with the need to remove their substances from their life, they're likely to see you as a safe place to have a conversation about substances when they are ready to have that conversation. And that doesn't mean you should just let them use, right? You should obviously create boundaries. You can create a sense of wanting them to be in a safe place, but the reality is they're not around you all the time. You can't stop them from doing things. But what you can do is let them know. You can create a sense that you are the person that they feel safest with. That's important.
Wow, I can't think of a more beautiful way to end amazing conversation. Thank you so, so much. This is
My pleasure.
really a game changer for parents, and I appreciate it so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.